gang, what's going on? It's ghetto, it's ghetto, it's ghetto. You know, forgive the days off, but I need some days off sometimes too, family. Damn it. You know what I'm saying? Hope everything's been going well with you and yours. But I know y'all like, God damn it, ghetto. They were just getting good with that D.N.C. employment. Listen, thank you for everybody who watched, who shared it, told a friend to tell a friend. And yeah, we're about to get right back to it. We're going to do some legal beagles. And then we gotta get to it, man. So with all that being said, let's go. Yeah, man. Yeah, y'all already know what it is, man. Y'all know what time it is. For those that may not have seen any of the other episodes, I highly recommend you stop playing and tap in. But let's give them a brief recap real quick.
Would you welcome, please, with me, Monica Klein.
Hold on 1 second.
Well, it is a pleasure to be with all of you today. I love being in a room with like-minded people who love family, who love liberty, and who love our country and are people of faith. And sometimes doing this work, I don't know about you, feels lonely. So to be here with all of you is very comforting. My name is Monica Leal Klein, and I'm the founder of It Takes a Family. I educate and equip parents with the knowledge and skills necessary to strengthen family trust and confidence. My goal is to help parents reclaim parenthood. But this wasn't always my story. I'm a former comprehensive sex educator and Title X training manager of over 10 years. I was trained by both the gay community and Planned Parenthood. I not only taught comprehensive sex education, but I also lived it. I started this career in 1996. Planned Parenthood was integral in teaching me how to reach school-age children. I received a private training from the Director of Sex Education in Austin, Texas. She began my training by making the case for comprehensive sex education. She described girls as young as 10 coming into Planned Parenthood with objects in their bodies, sexually transmitted diseases, and yes, even having abortions. And I was horrified by this.
10 years old, even having abortions. 10 years old, even having abortions. But let's keep going.
Stories, and my first reaction was, teach me how to teach these girls not to have sex. She reached over and patted me on the knee and she said, no, dear.
Silly rabbit, silly rabbit.
We're not going to teach them not to have sex. We're going to teach them how to do it safer. You see,
safe sex for 10-year-olds. Let's go.
We meet them where they're at and we teach them how to do it safer. Telling them not to have sex is judging, because you're judging their choices.
Don't you dare be judging.
My heart sank, but I was convinced. I knew, this was the expert, right? This was the person, this is Planned Parenthood receiving Title X funding. They're receiving all sorts of funding, so I thought I could trust her. So here's the first activity that she taught me, which is meant to break down the natural inhibitions of our children. The kids are asked to name their reproductive parts from medically accurate terms to slang terminology. At first, the kids are shy. But when they notice that the authority in the room is encouraging them, they become a bit more comfortable and begin to share out loud. By the end of the activity, even the most shy student is participating and giggling. Sometimes the educator may even ask the kids to use a marker to write the words themselves on the board. And what's left on the board is a collage of crass and dehumanizing words that objectify the human person and sexual activity. Now that they're comfortable with these sexual terms, the next lesson is to talk about their different types of sex. We covered oral sex, vaginal sex, and anal sex, and all its associated bodily fluids.
And all its associated bodily fluids. You can't make this up.
It means we talk about sex toys, tattoos, piercings, multiple partners, condom negotiation, dental dams, saran wrap, role plays to practice the negotiation skills, and informing partners about sexually transmitted infections. So whether those children were actually sexually active or not, it was the comprehensive sex educator's job to introduce them to every possible form of sex, which objectifies and dehumanizes the person and normalizes sex at a young age.
Oh my.
So what just happened here? Let me break it down for you. Planned Parenthood attempts to convince the culture that the sexual risk avoidance message brings judgment to people. Planned Parenthood does not believe in moral absolutes, but rather relativism. They believe that moral absolutes are judgmental, and they use that lie to silence parents and the culture. They've reduced our children and humanity down to very animalistic level. They're basically saying that kids are sexual from birth and are driven by their sexual desires, especially at puberty. They believe that they can't help themselves and they shouldn't have to, and they call this their sexual rights.
This is Freudian, crazy. This is the psychosexual development of children as categorized by Sigmund Freud, which has been ceremoniously debunked, straight up debunked. I don't know what else to say at this point. No, it hasn't, Ghetto. You're just so silly sometimes, Ghetto. I mean, I try to think you're smart, Ghetto, and then you say stuff like Freud's psychosexual theories have been debunked because they have. It's because they have. Let's keep going. But no. Let me address that real quick, right? As we spoke about the other day, if you haven't checked out the other episodes, please do so. So from the excerpt of this excerpt in regards to Freud's psychosexual stages, the title, verywell.com, Freud Stages of Psychosexual Development, article by Kendra Sherry. Sherry, please forgive me. Evaluating Freud's psychosexual stages. The theories Freud's theory is still considered controversial today, but imagine how audacious it seemed during the late 1800s and early 1900s. There have been a number of observations and criticisms of Freud's psychosexual theory on a number of grounds, including scientific and feminist critiques. Jump ahead again. Right here, Freud's predictions are too vague. How can we know that a current behavior was caused specifically by a childhood experience? And the length of time between the cause and effect is too long to assume that there's a relationship between the two variables. Freud's theory is based upon case studies and not empirical research. Yeah, he didn't go the Dr. Money route of actually turning boys out. Thank God. Also, Freud based his theory on recollections of his adult patients, not an actual observation and study of children. Interesting. Very interesting. So there's a lot of holes in this theory, but this theory of Freud's has been used to literally buoy Planned Parenthood. Like this is what they're basing this on. This is what they base these children's sexual rights on. Because Freud's position was they liked it. They were aroused from a very small child. different parts of their body as they developed for pleasure. And of course, this wasn't Freud's way of covering for his sick, sadistic colleagues and friends and mentors in the psychological world. Of course it wasn't. And I condemn you for even suggesting that. How dare you? How dare you suggest such a thing about Freud, the godfather of modern psychology? How dare you? Let's check this out real quick. Effects of abortion on the Black community policy report. The abortion consumer. Disproportionately, the leading consumers of the abortion services is the African American female, according to the 2011 abortion surveillance report issued by the Center for Disease Control, aka the CDC. You know, shout out to them. They look great in The Walking Dead, by the way. Black women make up 14% of the childbearing population, yet obtained 36.2% of the reported abortions. That's almost 40% of all abortions that occur in the Black community, family. Y'all don't think that's a lot? Okay. Black women have the highest abortion ratio in the country, with 474 abortions per 1,000 births. That's 50%, damn near. So if 1,000 children are alive, 1,000 children are every 1,000 children that are alive, that are born alive, almost 500 family are not. Percentages at these levels illustrate more than 19 million Black babies have been aborted since 1973. Family. 19 million. According to the Departments of Public Health of every state that reports abortion by ethnicity, Black women disproportionately lead in the numbers. For example, in Mississippi, 79% of abortions are obtained by Black women. In Washington, D.C., more than 60%. In Georgia, about 60% as well. Alabama. In state after state, similar numbers are found, with Black women aborting 2 or 3 more times their presence in the population. Meaning, if they're 5% of the population, they're getting abortions at a 15 to 20% clip or higher. They represent 15 to 20 or more of the amount of abortions in that area, irregardless of them being a small amount of the population. At every income level, Black women have higher abortion rates than whites or Hispanics, except for women below the poverty line, where Hispanic women have slightly higher rates than Black women. The prevalence of abortion facilities within minority communities serves as a major contributor to the rate in which Black women obtain abortions. Jesus. Black women are 5 times more likely to have an abortion than white women. A recent study released by Protecting Black Life and Outreach of Life Issues Institute concluded that 79% of Planned Parenthood's surgical abortion facilities are strategically located within walking distance of African and or Hispanic communities. This study coincides with the historical revelations that eugenicists dating to the mid-1900s argued that the most effective way they could advance their agenda would be to concentrate population control facilities within target communities, meaning build the center right there in a community, put it right there in the hood next to it. Historically, Blacks have been unwitting victims of hidden racist agenda of those behind abortion and birth control. Excuse me, let me read that again. Historically, Blacks have been the unwitting victims of hidden racist agenda of those behind abortion and birth control organizations because they believed they were receiving a new civil right choice. And that's so deep. In fact, pro-abortion forces have created messaging that reinforces the notion of abortion as a civil right. Crazy. As seen in a 2012 meeting of the Congressional Black Caucus and Pro-Choice Caucus. On Capitol Hill, these advocates urged their constituents to challenge the pro-life position by accusing them of making the alleged disparity in healthcare for Black women worse. Perhaps unknowingly, these Black legislators continually damage their political agenda because abortion is destroying their future constituents. You've already killed 19 million votes. If you keep killing your voting base and your voting bloc, you can't be in a position of political authority, because who will back you? Who will support you? Where will your voting bloc come from? Article continues, the advocacy for continued funding of organizations like Planned Parenthood demeans and eradicates the concept of natural rights and denies the right to life to the most vulnerable people of all, the unborn child. Establishing such a cultural norm erodes the natural rights of elderly and the infirm. For if the powerful can determine the unborn child, for if the powerful can determine that the unborn child does not have a natural, self-evident right to live, then it is very possible that they can and will determine that certain other humans no longer possess those rights as well. And as we spoke about this in the previous episode, as we get more and more into AI and computers making these medical decisions, if they can decide this for children, who generally speaking, even a computer algorithm would argue have the most potential to do the most good in life because they have the longest life potential of anybody because they're a baby. What are they going to do with an elderly person who is sickly? What are they going to do with an older gentleman who's got hurt at work too many times? What are they going to do with somebody in a coma, over the age of 55, overweight? What do you think these machines will do when they vote? Exactly. Ghetto, you don't know what you're talking about. Machines will never be the ones to vote on these things. Machines they'll never put that in the hands of a machine, Ghetto. You're making stuff up. You got these sci-fi movies in your brain. You're watching too much Star Trek, Ghetto. That's the problem. You probably sit at home all day and watch Star Wars, Star Trek, Stargate Atlantis, and you just sit around just watching these weird movies, just scaring yourself about what's going to happen in the future. You're a little weird, Ghetto. A little weird. Article continues, the population control nexus. There is a widespread perception that women, particularly African American women, are freely exercising their quote-unquote choice when they enter the doors of the nearest abortion center. Nothing can be further from the truth. The reality is that Black women are being pushed, led from behind into abortion centers by a cadre of elitists who agree with Frederick Osborne, the leading eugenicist of the 20th century, that quote-unquote Black birth control and abortion are turning out to be the great eugenic advances of our time. If they had been advanced for eugenic reasons, it would have retarded or stopped their acceptance. So they saying the lead eugenicist of the 20th century, Frederick Osborne, says birth control and abortion are turning out to be the great eugenic advances of our time. Think about that. So are people inadvertently doing the work of the eugenicist anyway? Sadly, might be so. In fact, abortion is steeped in the population control agenda. Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, RBG, reminded the nation of this in her 2009 New York Times Magazine interview when she said, frankly, I had thought at the time Roe was decided, there was a concern about population growth, and particularly growth in populations that we don't want to have many of. This is RBG saying that in 2009 New York Times Magazine interview, that when we decided Roe, we were essentially being eugenicists and deciding which populations we were going to put under control. And she was historically accurate. There was concern about population. Republican President Richard Nixon was at the center of promoting population control, particularly in the Black community. And that famous quote, "As I told you," we talked about it earlier, that a hell of a lot of people want to control the Negro bastards. My God. A majority of people in Colorado voted for abortion. I think that the majority of people in Michigan are for abortion. I think in both cases, well, certainly in Michigan, they will vote for it because they think that's what's going to be aborted, generally our little black bastards. This is a quote. Another quote, "As I told you," we talked about it earlier, that a hell of a lot of people want to control the quote-unquote Negro bastards. You know what we are talking about, population control. We're talking really, and what John Rockefeller really realizes, look, the people in what we call our class control their populations. Sometimes they'll have a family of 6 or 7 or 8 or 9, but it's an exception. These are only a few of the sentiments Nixon expressed in 1972, exposing the genesis of his thinking when he announced the conclusions and recommendations of the 1969 Population Control Commission, headed by John D. Rockefeller. 1969 Population Control Commission. Oh, we getting deep, boy. 1969 Population Control. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. The Commission on Population Growth in the American Future. My God. My God. We're gonna delve deep into this one. This looks absolutely amazing. I can't even. Sometimes I'm absolutely tickled pink. I'm absolutely tickled pink sometimes at these reports. Population control. That's not what they were doing. Ghetto, you just make stuff up. This is amazing. Okay, we downloading that now. We downloading that now. Get to it. Oh, we gonna get to it. Population in the American Future. The report of the Commission on Population Growth in the American Future. Oh, this is lovely right here. 388 pages. Oh, we gonna dig in. We gonna dig in. All right, but let's get back to this. Support the movement, family. Support the movement, family. You see me working. Support the movement, family. $ his ghetto point of view. $ his ghetto point of view. $. Hit the cash app. Hit the cash app. Hit the cash app. $ his ghetto points of view. Believing Planned Parenthood no longer needed to hide the population control impetus of her organization, Richard stated a lot of Republicans used to support family planning, and Richard Nixon signed that first federal planning program into law. That's a clear pathway to win back women's support, and it's to listen to the middle of their party instead of the extreme fringe. End quote. the quote-unquote family planning mantra, a euphemism for abortion, is no longer buried in the pages of Planned Parenthood's tax documents as it was in 2008. Planned Parenthood, believing abortion is so entrenched in the culture that it cannot be removed, now openly exposes what had been hidden, the work of controlling the birth rates of those they consider dysgenic. Let's keep going. The racist and eugenic roots of the abortion movement. This quote, then and now, Sanger's organization has used trusted leaders to convince the Black community that abortion as a form of birth control is not only acceptable, but also beneficial to African American culture. It is no accident that abortion has become so deeply entrenched within the Black community. Margaret Sanger, founder of the American birth control movement, was a leading spokesperson and activist in promotion of controlling the birth rate among Blacks and others she considered genetically inferior. Well, not just her; it was the entire eugenicist movement. She was just a spokesperson, you will, a very popular one of a larger movement. Let's not play that game. Let's not play that game. An avid supporter of eugenics, Sanger became a formidable force when pushing her quote-unquote Negro project designed to employ Black leaders to promote first birth control and later abortion as viable options for quote-unquote family planning. She favored the Malthusian branch of eugenics, frequently saying that the genetic makeup of the poor and minorities, for example, was inferior. Sanger believed it was necessary to reduce the birth rate among the diseased, the sickly, the poverty-stricken, and antisocial classes, elements unable to provide for themselves, and the burden of which we are all forced to carry. And quote, heavily relying on the members of the Black elite to help craft her message, the quote-unquote Negro Project influenced respected Black leaders, enticing them to Sanger's cause. And again, another example of the fact that we weren't called the Blacks back then. It was not called the Black Project, it was called the Negro Project, because that's how we identified all this. Oh, we've always been Black. Shut up. Anyway, although leaders such as Marcus Garvey strongly denounced birth control and abortion as detrimental to the survival of the Black race, and Marcus Garvey, I got my issues with you, but I see you stood strong on this one. Other Black leaders and organizations supported Sanger. W.E.B. Du Bois, of course, Adam Clayton Powell Jr., what else do you expect? Pastor of the Abyssinian Baptist Church in Harlem, the National Urban League, Mary McLeod Bethune, founder of the National Council of Negro Women, and J.T. Braun, editor-in-chief of the National Baptist Convention Sunday School Publishing Board in Nashville, Tennessee. Those are heavy hitters to have on your side, gang. Imagine if you're trying to get a message spread out through the churches across the country and you're tapped in directly with the chief of the National Baptist Convention's Sunday School Publishing Board. The dude who literally publishes the Sunday school materials is your homie. So just imagine what you can get through. Just imagine what you can get through. I'm just saying. That sounds crazy. But just imagine. Just imagine. Sanger's organization continues in this vein, persuading those whom Blacks trust that Planned Parenthood is for the benefit of the Black race. Today, the growing list of cronies of the abortion industry includes Jesse Jackson, Al Sharpton, almost the entire Black Congressional Caucus, and now their most prized gem, the President of the United States, who has openly resisted any regulation of the most unregulated industry in the nation. And imagine if they get Kamala as their next president of the United States to be, who's an ally. Imagine the level of Gang, they had the truck in front of the D.N.C. Gang. They were doing mobile abortions, family, and mobile vasectomies, family. Y'all don't see where this is going. Y'all don't see where this is going. They're not even hiding the fact that they're bedfellows anymore. They're right in your face about it because it's seen as a civil right. It's seen as a right, gang. This is something we fought for. Paying black staff members into the six figures. Paying black staff members into the six figures, hundreds of thousands of dollars. Planned Parenthood and other abortion supporters have fanned their advocates across the black community, spouting a deceptive but unified message of the lack of access to quality health care. Black staff members, would that be like actors and actresses who they pay to come out and say things? Supported by funds provided through such foundations as those headed by the Fords, Rockefellers, Carnegies, Gates, Soros, and others, pro-abortion forces deliberately craft messages that play on the fears of some blacks that a lack of access to abortion is somehow discriminatory. Then and now, Sanger's organization has used trusted leaders to convince the black community that abortion as a form of birth control is not only acceptable, but also beneficial to an African American so-called alleged culture. But Ghetto, are you saying? So they're saying that abortion is part of black culture. You heard that shit. They saying that abortion is a part of black culture. And if we're gonna protect black culture, we gotta protect abortions too, gang. Almost 20 million strong, baby. I mean, I would argue 20 million times, it would make it a part of the culture. But is this our culture or is this a death culture, family? Quote unquote black people, we don't have nothing better to call a culture than 19 million of us not making it to live to see a day. I mean, really think about that. We don't have nothing better to call a culture than 20 million of us not making it to see one day of life. Continuing on, although Sanger has been acclaimed as a champion for human rights, her philosophy was actually quite racist and bigoted, according to George Grant, author of Grand Illusions, The Legacy of Planned Parenthood. Sanger's philosophy on race, known as scientific racism, discriminates against other ethnicities based on, quote unquote, quality of genes. In Sanger's eyes, scientific racism in the case of the black community includes skin color. Grant exposes Sanger's discriminatory notions and documents many inflammatory comments she made during her tenure. Political ramifications of abortion on the black community in the nation. On March 6, 1857, U.S. Supreme Court Chief Justice Roger B. Taney handed down the court's decision in the landmark case of Dred Scott versus Sanford. In 1846, Dred Scott and his wife, Harriet, had been slaves residing with their masters in free territories for almost 9 years. Being prompted by their friends and local minister, Dred Scott sued for their freedom. After several years of litigation, the Scotts finally appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court. The court's decision stated that the Scotts were to remain slaves regardless of their place of residence. However, Chief Justice Taney did not stop there. He further stated that since Dred Scott was not a citizen of the U.S., he could not bring suit into federal courts regardless of the issue. He's not even a citizen, family. Furthermore, Taney made it clear that slaves were no more than personal property and subsequently had no ability to lay claim on freedom. By 1860, the overall slave population was close to 4 million, or 39% of the overall population of the Confederacy. Slaves in South Carolina, the state with the largest percentage of slaves per capita, outnumbered the whites at a rate of almost 3 to 1. I have hard times believing that, because never mind, I'm gonna keep going. With the greatest percentages in small towns such as Goose Creek, where the slave population was almost 80%. When the slavery ended, whites began instituting laws that required blacks to be able to read and write, to be eligible to vote, and to curtail the possibility of a sudden influx of blacks running for political office. Since almost the entire former slave population had neither skill, blacks were effectively shut out of the political process, preventing them from passing laws more equitable to all races. And to be at the same time, the South erected barriers to voting and holding office. They went even further with the help of the Supreme Court and through the law. The 1896 Plessy versus Ferguson case stripped blacks of another degree of humanity by instituting what became known as Jim Crow. Consider this: if those 10 million children had not been aborted, the voting power of the black community would now be at 16% nationally, rather than the current 13%. And this must be a quote from earlier, because now it's 20 million. Well, almost 20 million gang. This report was a few years ago, so I'm going to unfortunately have to naturally assume that some further uptick in the numbers has happened. More abortions have occurred since then. That is just unfortunately what I have to surmise based on these trends. A legal wall of separation between blacks and whites deemed blacks as inferior, not worthy of even occupying the same space as whites unless it was in the role of a servant. This dichotomy in the culture continued until the enactment of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Eugenicists, however, were unwilling to allow the racial divide in America to be healed. Richard Nixon, John D. Rockefeller, and others pushed to erect the third barrier to keep the races separate. Their initiatives, as we know from Nixon's comments, were to remove obstacles to abortion, particularly in communities we don't want too many of. Their initiatives, as we know from Nixon's comments, were to remove obstacles to abortion, particularly in communities we don't want too many of, as Justice Ginsburg said. These is your rights, family. These is your rights here. Such a high frequency of abortion within the black community inevitably creates far-reaching consequences, not only on the women who have obtained abortions, but also on the entire population. Recent census results revealed one such consequence, stating that African Americans have been surpassed by Hispanics as the largest minority group in the U.S. This is what happens, gang. We gave up our entire voting block. Well, it was our right to do so. It was my right to do so. All right, I will do what I want. And that's why I say a lot of times we're no longer, in my humble opinion, a community. We're just a bunch of individuals who live in close proximity to one another, but we all are only focused on what makes us happy in the moment. We're very rarely even thinking long term about ourselves. As crazy as it sounds, as selfless as some of us have become, then in our elder age, we're expecting the society that we've done so little to contribute to now take care of us. We're literally expecting a society that we might not even put children into to turn around and take care of us. So we're not even contributing at that point to the manpower that will go on into the future, to the innovators, to the designers, to the creators, to the people who will create the new companies that will hire millions of people, to the people who will help build up the country's the country's GDP. We're no longer trying to we no longer want to contribute to that. But as we age, because so many of us don't save, we're then going to want the country to take care of us. Ain't that about a mother? I think that is the craziest thing in the world. And some people say, well, I'm a tax-paying citizen. It's my right to have the country take care of me, even if I don't have children to put back into the workforce and into the, into the job creation force and into the innovators and movers and shakers and those with ingenuity and perpetuity. I'm not going to put anybody into that basket, but I need you to kick me out of the basket of people who have already put into it. My. Said my. You sure look good tonight. You know where I'm at on IG. You know where I'm at on Discord. It's all the same. Just look it up. As always, be thankful to all the blessings from the Most High. Hallelujah. 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 His Ghetto Point of View at Gmail, just in case you forgot. Just in case you forgot. Just in case you forgot. Let's continue on. Such a high frequency of abortion within the Black community inevitably creates a far-reaching consequences. Not only on the women who have obtained the abortions, but also on the entire population. Recent census results reveal one such consequence, stating that African Americans have been surpassed by Hispanics as the largest minority group in the U.S., something people kept warning would eventually take place. But if you don't consider yourself a community, we're not a monolith, we all our own people doing our own individual things, whoopty, then I guess it doesn't matter, huh? Oh, it will matter now. Oh, but it will matter now, huh? When you got all these groups of people coming into the country in large swaths. Oh, it matters now, huh? Oh, no. No, not it mattering now. My goodness. Michael Novak, the George F. Jewett Scholar at the American Enterprise Institute, had the following to say in regards to the political and social ramifications of abortion on African American society. Since the number of current living Blacks in the U.S. is 31 million, roughly speaking, the missing 10 million represents an enormous loss for, without abortion, America's Black community. The missing 10 million represents an enormous loss for, without abortion, America's Black community would now number 41 million persons. It would be 35% larger than it is currently. Abortion has swept through the Black community, cutting down every fourth member. Damn. Consider this: if those 10 million children had been aborted, had not been aborted, the voting power of the Black community would now be at 16% nationally rather than the 13%. Blacks who cry in desperation for political change must recognize that the majority of their civic leaders support policies which destroy their future constituency. Blacks who cry in desperation for political change must recognize that the majority of their civic leaders support policies which destroy their future constituency. Support policies which destroy your own future. It is not beyond reason to conclude that today there could be more Black senators and more representatives in the halls of Congress had it not been for the abortion platform supported by so many liberal Black and white leaders. Today, as a result of an abortion, Blacks have prevented themselves from gaining greater political opportunity, and I'd argue greater financial opportunities, greater scientific opportunities, greater technological innovations. We don't know who those people could have turned into. Man, this is crazy. Let's continue.
And that's the next point. Sexual rights. When we talk about
fair use.
So they've reduced our children and humanity down to very animalistic level. They're basically saying that kids are sexual from birth and are driven by their sexual desires, especially at puberty. They believe that they can't help themselves and they shouldn't have to. And they call this their sexual rights. And that's the next point, sexual rights. When we talk about someone having rights taken from them, we envision an oppressor. So who is the oppressor? Who in all the world would not want children having sex? The parent. Planned Parenthood views protective, conservative, faith-filled, moral absolute believing parents as pesky and a barrier to service. In my 10 years working with Planned Parenthood, at every training, at every workshop, and at every conference, I always heard, this is their quote, parents are a barrier to service. Planned Parenthood endears themselves to youth and attempts to replace the parent using secrets, or as the CDC calls it, privacy and confidentiality. Point number 4, grooming and sexual abuse. The activity used to break down inhibitions is very much like grooming for sexual abuse. It is a slow progression of getting children comfortable with talking about sexually explicit topics with adults who are not their parents. Basically, comprehensive sex education breaks down inhibitions and prepares children for sexual activity and sexual discussions. My belief is that this type of education normalizes sexually explicit conversations with adults who are not their parents, placing these children at risk of being coerced by sexual predators in person and online, because it's become normalized. The last step is to promote the use of condoms, lubrication, testing, treatment, and abortion. You see, when Planned Parenthood teaches children to objectify themselves and the sexual act, then it's just a natural next step to then objectify and dehumanize the unborn child. Then that cycle can start all over again. And that is the great hope of Planned Parenthood. Sexual freedom is promoted by them, by SICAs, by advocates for youth, and they are using comprehensive sex education to change the sexual attitudes of a whole generation of children so that they'll treat sex as an object, as a material thing to gain pleasure, all the while putting themselves at risk of pregnancies and disease. Planned Parenthood asked me to fill in for them at an alternative school in East Austin. They were considered high-risk youth. They were the ages of 13, 14-year-old boys and girls. I was teaching them HIV prevention, and normally when I would walk into the classroom, I'd write all the forms of sex on this side of the board and all the bodily fluids on this side. So I had oral sex, vaginal sex, anal sex listed here, blood, semen, vaginal secretions on the other side, and I started the conversation. A young girl raised her hand and asked a question, and I'll clean it up for you just a little bit. She said, when I give boys oral sex, I gag. Can you teach me how to do it better? I had the same reaction as you did.
When I give boys oral, I gag. Can you teach me to do it better? No, ma'am. I'd rather talk to you about why you don't need to be doing that so young. But nah, because I need to be cool and accepted. And if I don't do this, I'm going to be ostracized and looked at as weird or goofy or a baby. And I'm not grown up enough to do these things. Ma'am, you're not. You're not. Let's keep going.
I decided to reflect that question back to her. And I said, it sounds that when you're involved in this activity, you have this reaction and you don't like it. She said, that's right, I don't like it. But if you teach me how to do it better, maybe I will. So I simply said,
maybe
have
I
you
will.
ever considered
Fair
not doing the activity that you don't like? And she stared at me, a little dumbfounded.
She stared at her dumbfounded because no one had ever told her she didn't have to do these things, guys. No one had ever explained to this child that you don't have to feel the need to be sexually promiscuous at such a young age. No one explained to this girl that her body was hers and she didn't have to do any of this stuff. Let's keep going.
And all the kids turned in their chairs and looked at me with the same look on their face. And I realized I had said something they'd never heard of. And I said, guys, do you realize that you don't have to have sex? Do you realize that you don't have to have anal sex, oral sex, or vaginal sex? And if you don't, then you won't come into contact with any of these bodily fluids, and you won't be concerned about sexually transmitted diseases, and you won't be concerned about pregnancy. And the same little girl raised her hand and said, ma'am, no one's ever told us that.
No one ever told them that. Let's keep going.
No one, not their parents, not the community, and especially not all of us outreach workers working together in that community, knocking on doors and passing out condoms. Next thing I know, these kids start talking about ways that they can avoid having sex. And I thought, as a risk reduction educator, I lost control of the room. But I was okay with that because these kids were coming up with some amazing ideas. They thought, you know, one boy said, hey, we can go to the park and play basketball. And the same girl who asked the question said, I'm better at basketball than you are. I'll beat you. And he said, that's okay. I still want to play. Another girl said,
because they're kids. They just want to play. Nah, let's hypersexualize the children because it's their right. According to Freud, it's their right. It's the psychosexual development of children. You're not better than Freud. You don't know. How dare you try to play like you know?
there's free movies at the community center and they have free snacks. We could just watch movies. They were huddled together thinking of ways how they could avoid having sex, because when I told them not to do what they don't like doing, obviously they didn't like doing this. They were so young. It was not natural for them. A little girl pulled away from the group and came up to me and whispered, she said, I can't do what they're doing, right? I can't stop having sex. I'm already having sex and everyone expects me to do it, so now I can't say no. And I said, no, honey, you can say no. No one has the right to tell you that you have to have sex. Regardless of what you've done, you can choose today not to have sex for the rest of your life if you want to, or wait until you get married. And she smiled brightly and ran back to the group and joined them. Really, the point that I want to make about that story is how much these children really want truth. And we talk about that with millennials as well, that children are really craving truth. The social change movement assumes and wants to convince parents and children that they are sexual from birth and therefore have the right to seek sexual pleasure. That is why comprehensive sex education approaches children with such a strong and graphic sexualized teaching. Let me help you understand this. There is evil in the world, but many of these educators don't know their right hand from their left. I didn't know my right hand from my left. God, in the book of Jonah, Jonah did not want to save the people of Nineveh. And at the end of that chapter, he said, God makes a plea and he's explaining to Jonah why he needed to do this, why he needed Jonah to go share the truth to these people in Nineveh. And he described them as saying they don't know their right hand from their left. I became a comprehensive sex educator because I wanted to help people. But when you're moved by compassion without truth, it can lead down very dark paths. This is why I believe there are...
When you are moved by compassion without the truth, it can lead down some very, very, very dark paths. And I think that is an excellent place to pause it. 1 second, family. Let's just get this out the way. Fair use.
Disclaimer under Section 107 of the Copyright Act 1976. Allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, scholarship, and research. Fair use is a use permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing. Nonprofit, educational, or personal use tips the balance in favor of fair use.
Make sure you understand that, family. We'll be right back.
Where did that come from?
A license plate says it's from the federal government.
Attention urban poor. The Federal Health Department, in conjunction with the Center for Minority Control, is here today with complimentary flu shots. Complimentary means free.
Oh, it's free?
Okay.
Free needles?
God is good.
Hey, whoa. What the hell, Hop, are you people doing? Have you forgotten all your conspiracy learnings? Listen, the government uses projects to test all kinds of poisons. Syphilis, crack, the McChitlins.
Oh, those chitlins made me mix sick.
Now you see what I'm talking about.
Hold on, everybody. This is a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. And we, the people. I'm sure there's nothing to fear.
Thank you, Mrs. Stubbs.
How do you know my name?
Because we're your friend. Now come on over here and drop your pants.
No, Muriel, it's a trick.
It's just a flu shot. Don't listen to that fool.
Aha! Flu, F-L-U. Fool, F-U-L. Coincidence? I don't think so. Come on, people. Let's tell them they can take their flu shots and shove them up their arsenio.
Yeah, just leave me my Medicare, Medicaid, food stamps, and Social Security, and I'll be fine with no help from nobody.
Wait now. Hold up. Step back. Go black. All right, we'll just find another way to get your DNA.
Crazy. Let's keep going.
Work must be led by God's truth. Otherwise, how would we know what's good and evil? When the kids started to talk about ways to abstain about sex, they had the right idea, no physical contact. But let me make things very clear to you. Planned Parenthood, when they talk about abstinence, they talk about heavy petting over clothes and mutual masturbation, or even the use of pornography, which obviously is still a sexual activity and will lead to intercourse. That is their version of abstaining. But these kids were able to identify alternative activities that had nothing to do with touching one another, and it was beautiful. What is very apparent to me about this story is that, like I said before, children crave truth and leadership and healthy boundaries from parents and the adults in their community. School-age children are incredibly moldable. And if you give them the message that sex is simply a recreational activity that is expected at the onset of puberty, then you have molded them to objectify themselves and others. If we talk to children about healthy marriage, intimacy, boundaries, friendship, integrity, and respect, and waiting to have sex into adulthood or preferably in marriage, then we not only protect them physically, but also mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. Planned Parenthood and this social change movement have distorted the view of our children. While conducting Title X training for Planned Parenthood in South Texas, they clearly showed me how distorted of a view they have of our children. I was talking to them about human trafficking and statutory rape, and they assured me at this conference that they were not going to report that because they did not view our young girls as victims. One nurse raised her hand and said, "Honey, if she's not with this man this month, she'll be with another one next month." In my 10 years of working alongside Planned Parenthood, it's very common knowledge that statutory rape is happening, but they do not view it that way. Because if their definition of sexuality and that children are sexual from birth and they have the right to seek sexual pleasure, then nothing can be wrong with it.
Did y'all just hear that? Let me run that back.
A recreational activity that is expected at the onset of puberty, then you have molded them to objectify themselves and others. If we talk to children about healthy marriage, intimacy, boundaries, friendship, integrity, and respect, and waiting to have sex into adulthood or preferably in marriage, then we not only protect them physically, but also mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. Planned Parenthood and this social change movement have distorted the view of our children.
I'm going to bring back Monica Klein in the next episode. We also going to continue with this effects of abortion study. Gang, this is just heating up. And what's sad is I feel they're going to use this every 4 years to really rally the people and make the people fight. And I think this time it might really turn out crazy, gang. So I say have temperance, have calmness, have some rationale in your mind, family. Like, don't just get out there wilding with everybody, because this might get really turned up this time. But it's your boy Ghetto. We'll be back for the next one. Peace and love.
Thank you for coming. I'll see you in hell. people with the backwards attitude, pointing fingers, and that's a bad excuse for sitting on